spot, Elena. I reckon as soon as Brendan tells me, I'll introduce myself.
There we go. We are now live.
Okay. Hello, I am Maggie Dennis. I am the Vice President of Community Resilience and Sustainability. This is my very first office hour, certainly my very first office hour on camera. I'm very nervous about it, and we have not rehearsed it, so it's probably going to be a little bit wonky as we figure it out. We are trying to take in questions from multiple channels and make sure that people get the opportunity to voice their concerns and thoughts and things they want to know from me about our work. And I've asked a colleague from another team, Elena, to come in and help with that. So she's going to be helping to make sure that questions are triaged so that everyone gets an opportunity as much as possible. I have no idea if I'm going to get a ton of questions or hardly any. If I have more than I can do in this hour, I will follow up afterwards in writing, I promise. I will. It might take me a little bit, depends on if there's 1,000 or 50, but I will do my best to get them out as quickly as possible. So with that said, Lena, do you want to talk about what you perceive as the process? And again, this is not rehearsed, so we'll do our best.
All right. Hi, everybody. So we're going to be doing a Q&A. We'll be taking written questions from Telegram and from IRC and from the YouTube chat. And for those of you who are in the Zoom room, if you want to speak, if you could raise your hand in the chat or mention that you want to speak in the chat, and we'll be alternating between written questions and spoken questions. For people who do want to speak, just a reminder that I imagine most people are here today because they do have a question, which is great, and we want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. So please try to be concise if you do decide to take the mic. And remember that questions end with a question mark. So please try to ask questions that Maggie will be able to answer. So with that, I will start with a couple of questions that were submitted ahead of time. The first one, people are saying that you have banned people for edit warring and that you will be banning more people for edit warring. Is that true?
Okay, so we start with a nice softball. In a nutshell, no, not really. There have been times when we've been asked to help out with conflict of interest editors, with paid editors who are coming in and trying to force changes to articles, but I wouldn't call that banning people for edit warring. Edit warring is a normal part of resolving disagreements about article content. Sometimes it might lead to conflicts, and conflicts might lead to situations that land with us, but often that would require an extreme amount of escalation, like attacks off wiki. Most of the time, edit warring conflicts are things that are going to be able to be handled at a local level. So no, we've never banned anybody for edit warring. No, we have no plans of banning people for edit warring.
Great, thank you for that concise and definitive answer. Next question. One trust and safety area involves investigating complaints, an aspect that may be expanded if the Universal Code of Conduct manages to get agreement from the community about certain enforcement mechanisms. So one key concern around that is avoiding railroading by both on-wiki and WMF sanctioning bodies. So the question has an actual and a hypothetical element. Would you support a TOS need for all information within a complaint to be shared with the accused, except where there is both a credible possibility of actual harm to the victim or an off-wiki action?
There's a lot to unpack in that question, so I'm hoping that I'm getting at what's actually being asked here. My answer is yes, but I suspect there's a lot of room for disagreement about what actual harm means. Actual harm can take many forms, and there's a possibility that what's in mind here is physical threats or other threats. Sometimes actual harm is more than that. I can't talk about specific cases, but for example, we've handled cases of blackmail. Blackmail is not actual physical harm, but there have been threats that are financial in nature, threats that are stalking in nature, and these are things that we consider when we look at how much information and to whom to release it. Did I answer the whole question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you answered the actual. I think Is there anything else you want to add about like the hypothetical?
What was the hypothetical part? It was complicated.
Yeah. The question was asked from both an actual and hypothetical angle. If you would support, in theory, if the UCOC manages to get agreement from the community about certain enforcement mechanisms, would you?
Oh, hypothetically, I think that the people who are accused should have the opportunity to review evidence against them. Quite often when cases come to trust and safety, we're not looking at a simple he said, she said. We're looking more at what I would consider threat of actual harm. And that would be a situation where it's very difficult to figure out what we can share and what we can't. But I do believe, especially in cases that are taking place in our public wikis, the evidence is public anyway. And I do believe that we should have as much transparency as we can.
Great, thank you. The next question is a little bit shorter and a little bit simpler. How do people participate in defining the processes to handle Universal Code of Conduct complaints and respective policies?
So the Universal Code of Conduct is going to be rolled out in 2 parts. The board has asked for the first part to be done by the end of August, and that is the part where we talk about the baselines of behavior to which all projects must adhere. The second part is where we start talking about what the enforcement mechanisms and pathways are. And we are still figuring out what part 2 is going to look like. I mean, we're not even done with part 1, but that'll be coming out very soon. But there's going to be a lot of conversation and there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people to give input. Our goal is to continue reaching out not only to some of the dominant platforms like Meta, but to continue reaching out, hopefully through language contractors around the world, to make sure that we get people who frequently don't have the ability to show up on Meta to give input in their own language.
Great, thank you. The next question is around the mission statement. What will be done so that trust and safety can achieve its mission statement, specifically to protect newcomers and to make functionaries accountable to uphold the rules of the TOU, the CU policy? And are there any plans to prevent misuse of the CU tool and to introduce checks and balances for functionaries?
I'm not sure that I think that's the trust and safety mission statement. I don't actually know if we have a mission statement, to be honest. I'd have to look at our meta page, but I think that's kind of missing a lot of what we do. We're not just about protecting newcomers, we're about protecting everybody. And we're about protecting functionaries, we're about protecting readers, we're about protecting the public when threats are communicated on the sites. There's a lot of things we do. In terms of functionary accountability, this is something that I imagine that we're going to be talking about a lot as we talk about escalation pathways and as we talk not only through the trust and safety mandate and through the statement that was just released by the board, but through the movement strategy documents. We're going to be needing to look at how we create a culture of accountability, both with the foundation and with functionaries around the world. So are there plans? There's plans to talk about it. There's not actually plans that I know of currently in motion to do it, but I'm sure that it's something that we're going to be focused on as the movement strategy unfolds.
Great. The next question is actually in a similar vein, wondering about making environments more welcoming and how we kind of go about doing that. The question says, in my opinion, to make the editing environment more welcoming, a recognized advocacy group needs to be set up to create recommendations for improving policies and governance processes to better protect newcomers and to actively engage with newcomers to give independent support in dispute resolution. This group should consist of WMF employees and volunteers motivated by this cause. How would you start this group?
This sounds like more of a recommendation probably for part 2 of the Universal Code of Conduct. So I think I'm not going to answer how I would start the group until I hear if the community wants a group and what role they would want the foundation to play in starting it. So I'm interested in that question, but I'm going to put a pin in that and say, let's talk about that later.
Fair enough. Great. I love the forward-thinking focus of the questions, though, and I think that let's talk about that later and let's bookmark it and revisit it is a great answer for a lot of these questions that are forward-thinking. Thanks for asking those. So the next question is also a little bit shorter. My project already has good conduct rules. Why do we need a universal code of conduct?
Well, that's kind of a difficult question to ask because the answer is sort of you might not. The Universal Code of Conduct is meant to make sure that we have some basic standard across the whole entire movement so that people in every project have a basic shared understanding of how we are supposed to behave. It is meant to be helpful to people who are new and who may be facing conduct that they are uncomfortable receiving so that they know what they can expect from others. It is also useful to people who get into conflict with other people and want to know what the rules are governing what they can say and how they're supposed to act. It's helpful to everybody when the rules are clear. It may be that if a local community has policies that are already very well developed, that the baseline of the Universal Code of Conduct won't change those. It may be once the community has sat down to talk about what the baseline should be, it may be that the baseline is already covered for them. But I would hope that every project will look at their policies and compare it to the baseline and ask themselves, is this actually covered? And then in part two, to look at whether or not it's actually being enforced. So that's my answer to that one.
Great, thank you. The next question changes gears a little bit to talk about safety at events, but I assume that this could also be extrapolated to talk about safety in different spaces. The WMF published a booklet about keeping events safe. And in that booklet, as a first action, it states, if there's a threat to safety, call security or police immediately. And in that booklet, there's no mention of perceived versus real threats or de-escalation tactics or alternative channels of support. The person asking this question says they've raised this with the WMF before. And given recent attention to police violence, will the WMF reconsider its position?
The question, will it reconsider its position, assumes I know what the position was when they raised it with the WMF before. And I'm sorry that I have not heard these conversations, so I don't know how it was presented to them or what the response was. In terms of, is the material within the booklet open to further conversation? Absolutely. All of our content is open to further conversation. As we learn more about best practices, as the world changes, we need to consider how to change the guidance that we give people and how we teach people to interact safely within our movement, within their own environment. And considering safety with police is obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious. In my country right now, you may have seen, we're dealing with this quite a lot. So it's something that we should be thinking about. Again, I don't know what the answer was in terms of the position of the WMF at the time. Right, and it is, okay, Joe tells me in comment, we have deprioritized updates to that document for the time being, unfortunately. And I will say that sometimes it is not a question of whether it should be done, it is a question of when. And in this case, we know that movement events have been put on hold for now, so it may be something that we pick up again as we get closer to them, as we look at the priorities for a relatively small team over the next 6 months or so. Hopefully that's helpful.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's take a question from the Zoom room. So that I don't mispronounce the name, I will spell it out, Mattes. Do you have a question you'd like to ask live in the Zoom room?
You're still muted.
No, am I still muted?
No.
No, I didn't have any particular question at the moment. Just I want to support this code of conduct resolution from the board because I'm seeing a lot of questions in the community about neutrality and everything. And I think neutrality is a process that you achieve by making a fiction of a diverse point of views. And if you don't achieve diversity, you cannot achieve neutrality. So I'm just there to support. And if I have any questions in the process, then I will ask. But thank you for taking this initiative of the code of conduct. I'm just a bit worried about the resources it might take afterwards to enforce the code of conduct, but I suppose this comes afterwards in community discussion with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I agree. Obviously, I think it's important. And I mean, we are a small team, and I know that the community also struggles to get sufficient numbers to do the governance roles required. So it is something that we're going to have to take very seriously as a movement to make sure that we protect people's safety correctly.
Thank you for that comment. Okay, so I'll take one more question from the Zoom chat right now. How much of the work of the TNS team is advocacy and/or education as opposed to pure enforcement? And do you envision that changing under the proposed UCOC? If so, how?
So when I'm nervous, I forget numbers instantly. So please take me with a grain of salt when I say I think that I have about 10 or 11 staff people. And currently less than half of them are on enforcement. The others are working towards policy, which is the team that's leading the Universal Code of Conduct. And we are working on anti-harassment initiatives, including tooling improvements. It is my hope that in the coming year, we're going to be expanding our attention towards international incidents in a way that hopefully many of the people who are listening to me don't ever have to deal with, as we are seeing a rise in governmental oppression around the world. We are seeing more of our users who are being threatened in different places for their activities on our sites. And I'm hoping to hire someone very soon who can help us find ways to protect them in their environments as possible and to teach them how to be safe when they undertake the radical act of sharing knowledge with the world. So enforcement is less than half of the team. The rest of the team is dedicated to advocacy and evolution of policy and evolution of safety. My goal would be to continue expanding the other half and to reduce as much as possible the need for enforcement, although I will say that the enforcement team handles some pretty hardcore issues that will probably never wind up in the hands of volunteers, and frankly, should never wind up in the hands of volunteers. Some of the stuff that they deal with is dangerous to engage with if you don't have the protection of an organization behind you. And well, it's something like, say, 60% advocacy and evolution, 40% enforcement. And over the next year, I expect that number to shift to be enforcement even smaller. But we shall see what the Universal Code of Conduct conversations lead us to and how things continue to evolve.
Great. So I am told that there are 2 more raised hands. Joe, thank you for bringing that to my attention. My mouse is not working since I've signed into Zoom, so I cannot navigate over to see if there are other raised hands. So if you could keep letting me know if there are more raised hands in the Zoom room, that would be amazing. I can see the chat, but I can't see the raised hand functionality. So if people could let me know, that would be fantastic. So I'll take one raise hand from the Zoom room, go back to some other channel questions, and then come back to the Zoom room. Yair, would you like to unmute and ask your question in the Zoom room?
Yes, thank you. My question is, the Universal Code of Conduct, who will be leading the actual writing process of that? Will this involve community efforts, or will this be mostly from the trust and safety team itself in the writing the actual code?
So from what I'm worried that I'm going to mess up on this one because, as I said, my memory when I'm nervous. But from what I understand, the strategy recommended that we work from a baseline document, which Patrick Early can probably link us all to later. And it is going to be probably a mixed committee group of community and staff who are taking that baseline document and modifying it, and then putting it in front of community for comment and revision before it goes to the board. So it is not a staff-led process. Well, that's wrong. Staff are leading the process in terms of being accountable for making sure that it gets done and that it gets done on schedule, but it is community involved all the way. Did that answer you? If you have a follow-up, I'm open to that.
Great. Looks like that answered the question. Okay. To go back to some of the other channels, a question that has been coming up is, will the WMF impose a universal code of conduct on NLWP, or will the community democratically decide on one? So I think this can be extrapolated to apply to any community.
Absolutely. Sure. And let me back up and say that I don't know if everybody thinks about this the same way that I do, but the way that I'm thinking about this is very similar to the Biographies of Living Persons resolution made by the board some years ago, where the board said, this is the baseline of how we treat living people in our content. And other projects all the projects can set firmer rules if they want to, but this is the baseline of what is expected. And we have kind of a similar situation in terms of non-free material on the projects. Different projects can have different rules, but there are certain baseline expectations. My expectation is that the Universal Code of Conduct is going to be universally binding, that it is going to be somewhat akin to the terms of use, as that if you wish to participate in the movement, these are the baseline terms of behavioral expectations, but that different projects will have the ability to customize by strengthening, but not undermining.
Great. Let's go back to the Zoom room quickly for another live question. Kevin, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, sure. And so I think the question of enforcement is one of the biggest ones with any policy that purports to be like global on the Wikimedia projects. I mean, given the nature of like I think this is like one of the perpetual challenges that Wikipedia in particular struggled with. I mean, even since the very early days of like simple vandalism being a big problem. You can write a policy against vandalism, but developing the enforcement procedures takes a lot of time. And so my question is about, I suppose I'm just pretty confused right now on if we're going to be setting global standards, global minimum standards, we need some level of global enforcement. And we know that handling these cases is really difficult and takes a lot of staff time. As an English Wikipedia functionary, the trust and safety team has been invaluable to like my work, but you all only have so many staff members. How are we planning on getting, adjudicating some of these more challenging cases that might take weeks and many people to think through?
I wish I knew, but the real answer here is I think that we have a lot of conversations ahead of us about how to do it. From what the policy team is telling me, I'm slowing down. What the policy team is telling me is that they think about this as a kind of three-legged stool. The first leg is understanding what the basic codes of behavior are. The second is understanding what the pathways for enforcement are. And the third is creating the tools that make it easier to do this work. As an administrator on English Wikipedia myself, I poured a lot of time into copyright cleanup, and it is slow, laborious, painful work. Tools would have made my life so much easier. And one thing that the board is doing is they're directing the foundation to put more resources in developing tools for trust and safety work. And that doesn't mean my team, that means the whole movement's trust and safety work. So I think probably after the basic codes of behavior are established, which is due by August 30th, the next big conversation is going to be what do the pathways look like for enforcing behavior? What are the resources that we need in terms of people and in terms of tools to make this work possible? So I don't have an easy answer for you other than saying that I think we'll be thinking about little else until we solve this.
Great question. Okay, so we have, let's see, it looks like one more question for now from the other channels. But I think other people are hard at work typing up their questions. Are there plans for an ombudsperson or a kind of appeal committee?
So this is a really good question because the answer is yes. And you probably saw in the board statement that they're asking us to come up with a review committee to look at trust and safety's work that isn't part of what we call the bright line. And the bright line is material that is illegal, material that cannot be shared with community, material that cannot be appealed because we have a legal responsibility to protect the movement. So in the interim, while we are working on the code of conduct, we are already talking with our legal team about how to create an interim review process that we can stand up quickly, where we can share case information at a greater level of transparency than we have ever done before. I'm hoping that we will have clarity around this within the next couple of weeks. I expect that it will be a quick and fairly high-level process. We're not going to get an opportunity to talk to community widely about how to do it because we have to stand it up fast. It is a for the meantime process. In terms of the long term, with the second part of the Universal Code of Conduct, where we talk about enforcement pathways, I strongly suspect the community will want an appeal process. I'm trying to be very careful about saying, yes, this will be in there, because at that point, it's no longer a community process. It's what Maggie Dennis thinks is the right thing to do. But I'd be super surprised if people don't come in and say there needs to be an appeal process to make sure this is fair. What that will look like, I don't know. I have heard from people saying they want a global arbitration committee. I've heard from other people saying they don't want a global arbitration committee. So I suspect this is going to be one of the hard conversations we have coming up after August.
Another forward-thinking question. I love it. Great. So this one is actually more of a personal question, and I am personally interested in your answer to this, Maggie. How do you cope with the more challenging parts of the trust and safety job, like threats you may get? How do you deal with that?
A couple of ways. I mean, I will say that this job has its really hard moments. And one of the things the foundation does that I appreciate is give me unlimited access to psychiatric care. Thank you, foundation. I remember having to take advantage of that once when a suicide threat came in through the emergency channel that really devastated me. In terms of the threats we receive, and when I say we, I'm talking about my team because they can be extreme. One of Trust and Safety's members, I can't talk about specific cases, but I'm still going to use a word that upsets people. After Fram last year, one of Trust and Safety's team, her husband started receiving threats because somebody found out who she was married to and started reaching out to her husband to try to get him to control his wife. This is hard stuff. And this is part of what we deal with, and part of what we try to protect, especially functionaries in the community from, is working with them to keep them from being targeted by that kind of stuff. But I do it by having a team that is supportive and caring, by having people that will talk to me, and by remembering that it's for the best of all possible causes. I am a long-term volunteer on Wikipedia myself. I believe very much on what we're doing, even though I'm embarrassed to say that because I hardly volunteer these days, but it's still in my heart. And I think that the people who put their time here for free, sharing the world's knowledge, deserve safety. And my team is paid to give them that. And we take that really seriously. I'm gonna stop because I'm gonna get emotional.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. We have a question now live in the Zoom room. Nattes, would you like to unmute and ask your question, and also tell me how to pronounce your name so that if you ask another question, I can say it correctly?
You can call me Natasha because it's just a nickname.
Okay, great. Natasha, go ahead.
Well, thank you for speaking so frankly about that. But then again, don't you think you need more resources on the trust and safety team to be able to tackle all these problems arising? We kind of get the feeling that you don't have enough resources in terms of human resources. That's what I mean, to tackle all these problems.
That is a very good question. And I feel like I'm kind of uniquely positioned to answer it fairly because of the fact that for a couple of years, I was not just trust and safety, but I was at the executive level working with an entire department. So I will say two things. Yes, but so much of the work that we do is so critically important and is under-resourced. So I feel like the foundation is actually quite dedicated to resourcing us while also doing all the other essential work that needs to be done. And unfortunately, that means that we don't have the resources we need, but they try. And we have to try to figure out how to do the best we can while still sourcing growth of the platform and making sure that we are funding affiliates all across the world and events, standing up good, solid events. There's so much to do that we just don't have enough money to do all of the important work. So hopefully that does not sound like I am making excuses, because I really truly believe that that's the situation we're in. And I hope we will continue to find resources, and I hope we will continue to be better and better at using the resources we have. That said, if the foundation wants to give me a lot more money, I'm here for it.
Okay, it looks like we don't have other questions from other channels at the moment. Okay, we just got a question coming in, perfect timing. The code of conduct is possibly a mostly defensive mechanism. Are there some more proactive plans for making the community more resilient and sustainable?
Yes, but I should never say yes, but yes, there are plans for making the community more sustainable. Right now, our primary focus is on the code of conduct. There's the but again. But we do have other thoughts, including the hire that I'm planning to do as soon as I possibly can, to start working with the communities around the world to keep themselves safe in times of international turmoil from oppressive governments or from terrorist organizations that might target them. So we're looking at increasing training, and we're looking at increasing information to help people keep themselves safe in our communities in a number of different avenues, while at the same time having to be very careful about what we publicly state. Those of you who are familiar with English Wikipedia, and I'm sorry if I refer to English Wikipedia too much, but I'm an English Wikipedian, so I know it, may know the guideline on beans, which is to say, never tell somebody don't stuff beans up your nose, because as soon as you do that, they're going to stuff beans up their nose. I don't like to put out information that teaches oppressive governments and terrorists how to hurt our people. So we need to find ways how to teach people to be safe without pointing out the vulnerabilities that exist to those who haven't figured it out for themselves. And there's, of course, a whole lot of things that we need to do to help people learn how to debate better, how to work through conflicts around content on our sites, how to handle newcomers. Quite a lot of the conflict I see are people who show up and don't know how to do policies correctly. Nobody has the time to teach them. They don't know what they're doing wrong. They get angry. People on the other side get frustrated, and there's a clash that could have been averted if we had better onboarding, if we had tools that onboarded people better, helped them understand how to contribute without running into these problems. So there's a lot we need to do. Right now, we're focused on the code of conduct and on the international piece, which is of increasing risk to our communities over the past few years. But we are going to keep working on the whole community health package. I'm not supposed to say community health because it sounds like a health clinic, but I keep forgetting. Okay, somebody has a hand raised.
Yeah, well, and before we go to the next question, there's also just a comment in the chat that this thread towards safety and capacity building is a thread throughout the movement strategy recommendation. So it is important work that's kind of being tackled from various angles. Great, yes, raise hand. We have Yair has raised his hand again. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. So there's a certain amount of confusion regarding the Universal Code of Conduct, the board resolution, and its relations to the previous statements made by Trust and Safety. I was wondering if you could just confirm whether the Trust and Safety team will continue to follow its commitments made last July regarding short-term blocks and direct intervention in cases that are outside its previous understood scope.
Well, I have to tell you honestly, I was on leave last July, so I would actually need to read that. I'm sorry, I was on medical leave last summer and I missed that whole thing. But can you tell me specifically what it is that you are wanting to know what Trust and Safety will do? Because I will answer you as honestly as I can. Yes,
whether the commitments were about partial blocks during the Fram case, in the aftermath of the Fram case, whether they will, whether actually I think I have the statement open about.
That's helpful, thank you.
I'm gonna just send a link on the chat.
Although I think I might have enough that I can start to answer. And I will say this, this is my thought. I haven't talked about this with the team, with the board, with my boss, with anybody. I know why the partial ban tool was created. It was created because of the fact that we were receiving complaints that we didn't quite know what to do with, of people that we really did not want to do the only thing that we had available to us, which was to say, you can never participate in our movement again. So we were trying to think, is there a way that we can actually get involved without kicking people off for good? Because that's pretty extreme. I understood when I came back, they briefed me on everything that happened while I was away. I understood that the community was not comfortable with this tool and it was withdrawn. Whether it will ever be used again, I will honestly tell you, is going to depend on what we're told in terms of what the board wants us to do. What we did do was not talk enough about it. We didn't talk enough with the community about why we wanted that tool. We've made a lot of mistakes with communicating with the community. Part of that is because we're really busy and we have a lot of deliverables to do and there's so many people and the conversations never stop. Part of that is because it's scary to go out and talk to the community. We get a lot of, well, I mentioned to you, we had a staff member whose husband got contacted. You never know who you're going to run into when you go out and talk to the community. This is part of my commitment to talk to the community more. It's scary for me, but I'm going to do it. And I want to make sure that in the future, as we consider the changing needs for tools, that we make sure that people know why and that we consider all options and all concerns about them before we undertake any changes. So I can't honestly say, although I'll read that later and I may change my mind, I can't honestly say partial blocks will never happen again, but I can say it will never happen unless there is a strong reason and unless we have communicated that reason. I hope that helps.
Great, so just waiting here for some other questions. All right. Question that just arrived. I was wondering about plans relating to making the existing and incoming users happier rather than less threatened. Is there anything in that regard planned? I think you covered that a little bit a couple questions ago, but maybe you want to elaborate on happiness as opposed to feeling upset and threatened.
I will speak a little bit more slowly. If I had a larger team myself, I mean, if they gave me like thousands of people and I didn't lose my mind, I would definitely make this part of my work. But right now, my team is focused on this other part. However, I don't know if you're familiar with some of the work being done in our product department around growth. There's I'm afraid to talk about it and get it wrong. I've already told you all that when I'm nervous, I forget details, so I'm sure to get this wrong. But the growth team is working on an onboarding process for newcomers. There's a trial in the Korean wiki, I believe, possibly more. Hopefully somebody knows what I'm talking about. But if not, we can share links later where they're looking at what the experience is for newcomers and what newcomers need to be more satisfied as they onboard. So yes, there is work being done on this right now, not by my team, but it's being done now. Thank you, Sherry.
Thanks for providing that context. The next question that's come in has a lot of context around it, so I'm just trying to pare that down a little bit so that it'll be easier to digest so that you can answer it. But it's about the LGBT plus community, and it's talking about WMLGBT plus is not wiki project specific, but several participants are interested in offering better off-wiki volunteer support to targets of LGBT plus related harassment. Also informal advice, informal advocacy, and that there's kind of a lack of a sympathetic admin group. There's the issue, of course, that LGBT plus people feel unwelcome to contribute to certain topics. Is this part of the TNS vision? And even including funding and training, and for how support can work before issues are extreme enough for a WMF-TNS intervention. I don't think I've asked that extremely clearly, so let me try to just
I think I got you. I'll give it a shot, and if I'm not getting it right, whoever asks the question, poke in and go, no, this is what we mean. So has it been part of the vision? Honestly, no. It might be at some people in the team levels. I can see Crystal in the Hangout. She's nodding her head. She's got a background in social work. I think it's part of her vision. We've been focused far more on what we can do with our small team, and support is important, but it's also really hard to do. I want to illustrate that with an experience from my own work stream. Many years ago, again, this is related to the emergency channel that we run. I received an outreach from a community member considering suicide, and I wrote back to him with, I had worked on suicide support lines when I was younger, so I had this idea that I might be able to figure out something to say to relieve their distress. I wrote back to them with my thoughts, on how I might make them feel better, might make them feel supported, but I said the wrong thing. Fortunately, it didn't result in this person completing their suicide idea, but I said, think about your daughter, because as a mother, to me, that would have been powerful and would have probably changed my mind. But we had a consultant who said, you can't do that because you don't know what their triggers are. And that's what makes support really, really hard. So yes, we need to find peer support groups. We need to find mechanisms for supporting people, but it's a huge topic. And so it is not something that we have really tried to approach in a systematic way, because there are so many factors to consider around how to do this safely. There's the possibility that people who provide support become traumatized by incidents that they hear about, that we might have a liability for, that we need to figure out. There's a possibility of people who are, well, I'm sure we've all been around the internet long enough to perhaps have stumbled across a support group or two. Sometimes people come there to feed on trauma. How do you make sure that the people who enter your support group are actually there to help and not there because they are enjoying vicariously manipulating injured people? Or how do you make sure that you don't have people who are pretending to be injured in order to get the emotional support from volunteers who are then damaged by what they're exposed to? All of these things happen in online support networks. So I think it's a great idea. I would love to see us do more of that. And I'm really interested in follow-up conversations, but I do want to note that it's complicated to do this right and safely. So I really welcome experience and expertise in that.
Yeah, I think your answer touches on, kind of wanting to expand capacity in the future. Again, this is a very forward-thinking question. The follow-up question that came to this, because you did mention that maybe we don't have the capacity to tackle this right now and do it in the right way, make sure we're covering the bases that need to be covered. The follow-up question, how large would you like your team to be in order to actually tackle all the things that you think we should be doing?
I don't even know if we need to enlarge the team to do that. We just maybe need a contractor budget to hire an expert to come in and work with a community group to set out some baseline rules. Some years ago, I had a conversation with a man who ran a support group of exactly this kind of thing. And we explored the possibility of perhaps using his platform as a way of setting up a feedback loop for people who need support. And while we were talking with him, his platform shut down. So it sort of was one of those things that we just have not had time to invest in, and I would like to. So it's not about me wanting trust and safety to be bigger. It's about the fact that I do have a limited amount of resources, and I am not at all opposed to community groups who want to stand up things, but I would love to talk to community leaders who want to do this work to make sure that they're considering the risks to themselves and the risks to other people who join them in this work before they do, so that we make sure that they are as safe as possible. Yes, that's a very good idea. We could do that, and that would be a low cost interim solution. Hopefully someone will capture the chat notes too, so I make sure I don't forget
Maggie,
those.
do you want to read out what you were reacting to?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. One thing which could be done would be to post support group links on the TNS page and emergency numbers on the first page. Yes, we do have a page of emergency numbers, but I don't believe, although I may be wrong, that we currently have links to support groups.
Natalia, did you have another question? I see your hands raised in the chat.
Is that me or
Yes,
another?
please.
Okay. I do think that support links and emergency number on the first page that is on Meta for Safety and Trustee is vital, because there's none there, and it's actually difficult to understand where to write and who to call in the case of emergency. I've checked it up at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was hard to navigate, and it's all in English. So I think it should really be in all available languages. And I have also a question for you. Don't you think that in the code of conduct, there should also be something about the fact that people should be able to accept gracefully formulated critics? I've seen that in the open source code of conduct elsewhere. And I think also that debate should be authorized, and people should not be silenced by people holding places of power. I'm not expressing myself very clearly because I'm half French. Sorry.
I understand you, I believe, and I think it is a yes. I mean, I won't be writing the code of conduct, but if I'm participating in what should be in it, yes, I think that should be there. Our staff page template on Meta has a space for a quote, and mine is actually a deliberate misquote that says, conflict is inevitable, combat is not, because I believe that differences of opinion are really important to make sure that we're understanding all sides of an issue. If I surround myself with people who think like I do, I'm only going to get the answer I would have gotten in the first place, and I make mistakes. So also there are some comments being left in French. I'm afraid I barely read Spanish. I do not read French. If anybody could help with translating in case there's something I can answer there, I'd be so grateful.
I'd be happy to translate.
Thank you.
This is Amber speaking. It says, just two small things. On one hand, it's very difficult for those of us that don't speak English to follow this type of reading. And on the other hand, it seems to be that there's a lack of coordination in the policies applied on the projects.
In terms of the language difficulty, I am truly very sorry. I am aware, and I hope that by doing outreach in multiple languages, the way we're trying to do, we can at least come somewhat close to addressing that. And I hope we will be publishing notes from this, and I hope that people will feel free to translate them. In the second thing, a lack of coordination across projects, yes. That is part of what the Universal Code of Conduct is meant to do. It is meant to help ensure that there are baseline rules that do not change from project to project. And there are a lot of reasons for this, including that it is very hard to go from one project to another and find out that what you have been doing over here is not allowed over there. For instance, I always have to ask myself how specific I want to be because I'm not supposed to talk about specifics. This was public, so I think it's safe for me to talk about this. Last year, I understand there was a case where an individual was blocked on a wiki for having the name that suggested that he was gay. This is not okay with me. I don't know if the Universal Code of Conduct is going to get down into the detail of saying don't block people for having names that suggest that they are gay, but I believe that people should be free from homophobia wherever they go. I believe that people should be free from facing sexism wherever they go, racism wherever they go. I do not believe that a local policy should make it okay to discriminate against people, and I hope that the Universal Code of Conduct will agree with me. That may have been very controversial, and if so, I probably shouldn't have said it 10 minutes before the end of the meeting.
Well, let's immediately pivot to another question then. We have another question quickly from the Zoom chat, and then we'll go back to the other channels. Maggie, you mentioned before that the Universal Code of Conduct would be developed between some form of working group established between your team and community representation. When is this expected to begin, and when do you envision the first draft of this combined effort to be shared with the movement for feedback?
This is where my memory for numbers is going to get me in trouble because the people who are doing this work are in the room, and I'm going to say something wrong and they're going to be very mad at me because suddenly their timelines are going to be very different. But I'm speaking very slowly in case Patrick wants to type something. My understanding is that in about 10 days, there's going to be a publication of some of the initial feedback received in the 19 conversations that have already happened around the world. I'm not entirely sure when the committee is going to be stood up, but I know that Patrick is planning on posting information about that very soon. I don't even exactly know how we're going to be constituting this committee, but it'll all be coming out very soon. And I'm not even sure if I answered the question. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
Did I? Yeah. Okay. If I didn't answer the question, please tell me.
Yeah. Yes, we got a yes. So that's great. Okay. So this is about WMF versus community making rules. In general, the WMF makes rules and the community makes rules. Is it like the WMF rules should be enforced by the WMF and the community rules enforced by the community, or is it based on harmfulness, or maybe something else?
All right, I'm trying to fully understand what's meant by that, so I might not get it fully right.
I can ask it in a more straightforward way.
I think I'll try. And if I get it wrong, just tell me. So for example, the foundation effectively created the terms of use, and the terms of use bind all contributors. But when I say the foundation here, I am referring as well to our board of trustees, which ultimately tell us all what to do, right? That's wrong. That's wrong. Y'all are going to get mad at me. That was wrong. Please don't quote me on that. They tell us what the rules are that we are required to follow. They don't tell you what to do. They tell me what to do. But in terms of the policies the foundation sets, in case of, yes, with a ton of community input, I know. Philippe commented that the terms of use was a huge amount of community input, which in fact I did run. We had more comments than the text of Moby Dick in that consultation. It was incredible. But it's hard to say. The Universal Code of Conduct is a rule that everyone is expected to follow, just like the Biographies of Living Persons resolution is a rule that everyone is expected to follow. And the terms of use is a rule that everyone is expected to follow. However, there are policies that the foundation sets that apply to the foundation, and policies the community sets that apply to the community. Where I think maybe this question going is in the direction of, no, I don't know. I'm going to stop babbling. Could somebody clarify what's meant by this so I can tell you what you want to know?
I don't know that we'll get immediate clarification.
I'm so sorry. I should have just asked it first instead of trying.
There is a copy pasted additional clarification. I understand this to mean is in charge of enforcing its own rules and the community in charge of enforcing its own rules that they make? Or is there some sort of determination who gets to enforce what?
So Ad is asking, is the WMF going to impose a universal code of conduct on Norwegian Wikipedia? So if that is, I think I will answer that more directly than perhaps I did before, just in case people didn't get it. We are creating a universal code of conduct. We are presenting the universal, oh, I'm so sorry. Again, when I get nervous, I get all kinds of things confused. It is Norwegian, not Dutch. When this is presented to the board in August, the board will either ratify it or they will not. If they ratify it, it will indeed apply to all projects. I need to stop trying to watch the chat. I'm just making myself more confused. So yes, the WMF in the person of the board will impose a universal code of conduct across the entire movement if it is ratified.
Very
Hopefully somebody will ask me an easy question so I can leave this feeling like I didn't embarrass myself.
You've been doing great. You've been doing great. There is a lot going on in the chat. I'm liking watching the comments, and thank you so much to Natasha and to Amber for translating from French. It's very cool to see some multilingual conversations going on.
I've got some questions I will answer. How will we work for buy-in to the Universal Code of Conduct? I hope the Universal Code of Conduct will sell itself. There's a lot of anxiety around it, and I hope as we start to develop the Universal Code of Conduct, people will go, oh, is this what it is? And then it won't seem so scary. I don't believe that we're going to come up with a universal code of conduct that is suddenly going to make things that we all accept completely and utterly illegal and grounds for banning. That would really surprise me. I've never seen that kind of attitude in the community. Philippe asks, what's the thing you're most proud of over your decade at the foundation? Yeah, I've been here for almost a decade. I guess I'm proudest that I'm still here. This job is always complicated, always changing, always stressful and exciting, but I will stay because I believe in what you all do. What's my favorite kind of ice cream to use at mixers? Anything with caramel. Imposed after, let's see, Ad asks, imposed after ratification, but after consultation with communities. Yes, it's a fairly quick turnaround, but yes, there is community consultation. Yes, and Jeffrey notes that Universal Code of Conduct sounds like common sense, but as we see increasingly in the news, common sense is not always common. This is true. If the Universal Code of Conduct comes back and is completely, absolutely insane, if we as the community, and I include myself in that, come up with something that makes no sense whatsoever, I hope the board will not ratify it. I hope that comment won't be taken out of context because that won't sound very good to my boss. Oh, she's in the room. Don't tell her.
Well, we have another question quickly from the other channels. I think you'll be able to address quickly. We've got 2 minutes left. As an OTRS member, we receive a lot of email related to trust and safety. What's the best way to open a direct link between OTRS channels and trust and safety?
Very good question. And I think I need to defer that to the trust and safety team because I can easily tell you what I think. But can I ask one of the trust and safety team members in the room, Patrick, can you take that up with the trust and safety leadership to make sure that we consider that?
Most certainly. And yeah, I think we have good relationships with OTRS agents over some of our workflows already, but it could definitely be stronger and more formalized, definitely.
So as we're coming to the end, I thank you all for coming. I thank you for asking questions. I'm sorry for the fact that I do get nervous and I sometimes stumble over my words. I hope that I made sense nevertheless. I will be posting notes about this as soon as possible. And I will be trying to communicate with you more regularly, both this way and in print, which I think will be helpful to people who can't talk to me in the only language I fluently command. So thank you all. I am definitely going to walk outside and take some deep breaths. I appreciate you coming.
Maggie, quickly before we sign off, do we know where the notes are going to be posted?
I had not thought about that. Maybe we will use the office hours standard channel. I believe that it was added to the link there. I thought about that. I didn't because it wasn't being done in IRC, but it seems like a good place. And thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.